everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. When George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer, thousands of Americans took to the streets, and their chants of Black Lives Matter were heard around the world. Others were not prone to marching, but they care and spoke up against racism with friends, family, and colleagues. Still, far too many have said nothing. Perhaps from fear of saying the wrong thing, or worse, denying that racism exists. What happens when we keep silent? Welcome to part one of our Another View Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall, when silence speaks volumes. Right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Welcome to part one of our two-part Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall. Our topic this time is When Silence Speaks Volumes. We have a stellar panel with us to get the conversation started, but we need to hear from you at 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Get involved in our conversation now, and then join us this evening at 6:30 p.m. for a virtual town hall discussion on Zoom. Go to whro.org/talkaboutrace to register. It's free, and we want to hear from all of you, so please plan to join us. Now let me introduce our panel. Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander is no stranger to Another View. She's an internationally renowned historian and the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Norfolk State University. How are you, Dr. Newby-Alexander?
I'm just fine, Barbara. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Eric Claville is the Director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. How are you, Eric?
Doing great today. Thank you, Barbara, for having me.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. And Veronica Gallardo is the Casemate Museum Operations and Collections Manager with the Monroe Authority. Veronica, welcome to Another View.
Thank you, Barbara.
Glad to have you with us. And joining us for this evening's conversation will be Jonathan Zur, President and CEO of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Jonathan is super busy these days helping others navigate race and racism and could not join us this afternoon, but will be with us tonight. So you all are a stellar panel to help us guide this conversation. And there we go. Okay. I have to tell you, I found it amusing that this morning when I read my devotionals, I read Proverbs 21:23, which says, "Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles." And I thought that was kind of interesting considering our conversation today. But if we keep silent about racism and racist actions, we actually could bring trouble. Your thoughts on that? And Eric, I'm going to start with you since you're the only man with us today and you also are the preacher. Eric?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay. I thought so. I was saying, making the statement that whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles. That was one of my...
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. Can you hear me now, Eric? All right, I tell you what, we're going to work on your audio. I'm going to go to Cassandra, and let's get your response in terms of if we keep silent about racism and racist actions, we could actually bring trouble. With your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, we can bring trouble. In fact, I recently wrote and is published in the Phylon magazine, which the Association for the Study of African American Life and History does. Mm-hmm. And in that, I said historical silences show our perspectives of the past, and it erases people of color by supplanting our understanding with false narratives. And so, yes, absolutely. Silences, especially historical silences, are deadly to a society. I'm reminded also of Leon Higginbotham's book that he published in 1978 called In the Matter of Color, in which he mentioned in his epilogue his conversation with Chief Justice Chief Justice Earl Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they both really agreed upon was that when we're silent, especially about our legacy of slavery, which people talk about like it's a chapter in American history, when I always say if it was a chapter, then we're talking about a 2-chapter book. And so, over half of our legacy has been about slavery. And when we erase that, we erase this long, long history and culture of oppression and dehumanization of groups of people based on how we identify them. Because not all African Americans can be seen as African Americans. There are groups of Native peoples who have African American ancestry or African ancestry. There are groups of whites in this country who have African ancestry. But if they are viewed as African American, then they are marginalized accordingly. And so when we erase that past, we erase even the mention of slavery in our narratives and refer to people who have been enslaved as servants, we've then erased this long, important history that we must recognize, that we must come to grips with, and we must set aside these personal feelings that I hear individuals have whenever we talk about race. The first thing I hear from so many whites is, well, my family wasn't a slaveholding family.
Right.
Well, first of all, most of the time that's incorrect. But secondly, even if that's correct, talking about this and talking about your guilt are two entirely different things. And if you feel guilty about talking about that, then that opens up a whole nother conversation that we have to have. And so I think all of that speaks to the importance of how historical silences are really a problem in our society.
Veronica, when people say to you, and I've heard this often, and I wonder if you've heard it also, when they say, you know what, if you just stop talking about race, it will be okay.
Yes, I have heard that pretty much all my life, honestly. Being a Latina, first generation born here, and some of the comments that Dr. Newby-Alexander is talking about is true. That historical silence of people of color, people that migrated here, people that were here before other people are constantly, looked upon and mistreated. And, when you think about Latinos here and, when they've been here and all of the work that they put into this country, and we don't feel like we belong, or people mistreat us like we don't belong. And so, there has been this silence. There's people that don't talk about it, don't understand it, aren't reflecting, don't understand the relationship between United States and Mexico and workers coming from other countries here. And, due to that silence, due to not understanding the impact that other cultures have brought to this country that are not white, affect and, that conversation of race and racism.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, are you with us now?
I am.
Okay. Well, glad. We're glad. We're talking about the whole idea of if we keep silence about racism and racist actions, the type of impact that could have.
Well, again, thank you so much for having this Race Let's Talk About It series, and I'm very honored to be here with the panelists. By being silent about anything that's wrong, what you're doing is that you're enabling evil to take root and to continue to thrive. It's our jobs just as human citizens to make sure that we speak up, make sure that we intervene in a way that, whether it's with our voices, with our position, or physically when someone's being physically hurt, to ensure that there's safety for those individuals that are being abused by hatred. And what discrimination is, it's just pure hatred built out of fear. And that's why fear-mongering is such a powerful tool, especially in politics. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to delve into that now, but it is imperative that we as human beings, as in general, when someone is being abused, when someone is being taken advantage of, when someone is being lied up on, when someone is being done wrong, if we know it, if we see it, and we sit back and do nothing, we're just as bad as the ones that are doing the abusing, the discriminating, and the like.
Mm-hmm. So could George Floyd's murder have been a silent moment if it had not been for cell phones and social media? Go ahead, Eric.
Sure, I'll definitely jump into that one. Absolutely. If you took a look at that officer's face while he had his knee on his neck and pressing and pressing and pressing, the smirk he had on his face, he did it so cavalier, as if he had done it before. And we know that he has done things like that before based upon reports, the reports that are coming out about his overuse of force, and also his side gig as being a security guard and how he goes overboard, especially when African Americans are involved. You know, what cell phones have done is that it has simply brought to light to the world what African Americans have been enduring from since we arrived here. And that was legitimized in the law, and not just law, but also customs and practice. And now that we see it, there's no way we can deny it. And anyone that sits back and says, oh, well, maybe he brought it on himself, and video shows that he didn't, or maybe he deserved it, or whatever the case may be, they're lying to themselves. And what they're doing is they're trying to legitimize their own hatred, their own fear, their own discrimination. But cell phones and video have become the equalizer. And hats off to the citizens that stood there and videoed it without moving, both black and white, male and female. Mm-hmm. And it is a disgrace that the other officers did not intervene when they saw that man dying and say, get off of him. You're doing wrong.
Yeah. Veronica, I saw you nodding your head.
Oh no, I'm agreeing with what Eric is saying.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add to that in terms of whether you believe that the whole George Floyd and others, I mean, you know, what happened with Breonna Taylor and with Ahmaud Arbery and other, now that we're seeing this through the use of technology, as opposed to hearing about it, you know, months later after it may have happened, or never hearing about it because people don't want, again, they want the silence to be the leader.
So there's a lot that I believe in regards to, you know, how people feel about when they see something that's wrong, when they see this, the unjust. And, you know, Eric had talked about the fear of stepping in, the fear of being the only person that's going to say something, the backlash of you possibly might get arrested. But in regards to, I think that today is a new day, with where the next generation is not going to tolerate this. You know, I look back at some of what has occurred in my family, and the whole idea of, you know, not saying anything and moving forward, keeping your head down, stay out of trouble. And I believe that there's still people that think that, especially, you know, people of different races, minorities. Mm-hmm. And then there's a number of other people that could say something, but might feel that that's okay treatment. You know, I think it's disgusting, honestly. You know, I've always been a person that speaks up in regards to mistreatment. It really doesn't matter what type of mistreatment. I'm very vocal, and you know, I think if something's not right, you should say something.
Mm-hmm. Cassandra, I mean, historically, at one point in time, you kept silent in order to stay alive.
Well, absolutely, especially if you're not regarded as human. I kind of want to bring us back to 1867.
Okay.
That's kind of what I do. I'll bring you back to the past. And I'm always reminded of this law that Virginia passed. And by the way, Virginia's laws, especially with regards to race, became part of the slave code, which always included free blacks, and it was duplicated by all the other colonies and states afterwards. And so Virginia's put its imprint, its racial imprint on the nation, and has now an opportunity to put another imprint on the nation that really reverses a lot of that. But one of the most horrific imprints that it put on was this 1867 law that allowed for, quote, the casual killing of black people, and white people were allowed to kill black people according to this law if black people resisted them in any way, and the killing of them was not seen as a crime. And the fact that they called it a killing as opposed to murder was the beginnings of laws that evolved in Virginia and the rest of the nation that began to remove the actual humanity of people of African descent. And I think that's why even when we have African Americans getting killed by the police, you don't ever see the question come up, well, did they deserve it? When a white person is killed by the police, it is only when a black person is killed that there must be some kind of clear-cut evidence. I'm reminded of Rodney King when those cops encircled him and beat the crap out of him with their batons. And the members of the jury actually said that it looked like he fell and his head bounced up from the ground and into their batons, as opposed to the other way around, which is what we all saw. There was such a desire to justify hate, especially directed to an African American that they viewed as somehow criminal or a threat to society. And so that 1867 law basically allowed for the killing. And that's why all these other laws that have been passed by states in the last 10 years that allow for people to take a gun and kill somebody else if they are threatened is such a danger to African Americans and should be removed immediately from every single book in every single state, because it goes along with that casual killing law of 1867.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What does silence speak when we say when silence speaks volumes? What does that mean to you in terms of racism? Have you been a part of someone who has remained silent, or have you been a part of something and you wish someone had spoken up? Give us a call and let's talk about it. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. I want to ask you guys to give us an example of something that has happened to you that has been that you felt was a racist action or in somehow involved racism, because I think people think that if you talk about history or you talk about killing of George Floyd or you talk about police brutality, that this is something that is still far removed and that it doesn't happen to people of color on a daily basis in terms of the kinds of interactions that we face that are racist interactions. Eric, let's start with you.
Sure. So this is a very good question to pose, because we live in a day of what's called microaggressions. And a lot of these acts, especially being a young black male and a professional, I get a lot of individuals. First of all, I operate in a lot of circles where there's not a lot of me that look like me. So I operate in a lot of circles where there are a lot of older white males, okay, traditionally. And you have some white females, but mostly older white males. Mm-hmm. So you get those looks as if, why are you here? Are you sure you're in the right place? And then what I've done is I've created, when a person's asking me, what do I do for a living? Or why am I here? I've come up with a stump speech where I tell them what I do and so forth, and really it kind of leaves the response of, oh, okay. The microaggression then comes in where things that I do, or maybe something happens, especially when Barack Obama was president, they'll make slight comments about him, or when I make a comment about something I'm doing, it's like, oh, I just thought you just sit in the house all day in your pajamas, or something like that. Which again, that's when you have my business card and you see me, that's a slight at the old tropes of the lazy African American male and the like. So those used to come quite a bit, but as I have created mechanisms to address those issues and address them up front, that's the way that I handle them. But they do still come.
Did it cause you resentment that you even had to create a narrative in order to justify who you are, as opposed to being just accepted as a person who is involved in whatever the activity was?
It doesn't make me angry, because I understand the game that I'm playing, and I understand the history of America. America itself, not the physical place, but the idea of America was created for white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. And white males have had a great run at being the dominant persons in our society for about 360 years, especially when you look at the history of African Americans and the like. They've had a great run at it. So when a country was created for you, run by you, and anyone that tried to come in to have a stake in it were either forcefully pushed out, killed, or written out or marginalized by the law. You now understand the system that you're operating under, which is why we always say that the mistakes that African Americans make, you can't make them because they're going to cost you more. Or we always say we have to be perfect, we have to be flawless in things that we do, especially when dealing with circles that we don't operate in, and there's a lot of white individuals in those particular circles. So we understand that. So I understand the game, I understand the history. So I'm not upset. I'm just playing the game with the cards that I'm dealt.
Okay. Cassandra, same question to you. What's something that has happened to you?
Yes, I've experienced both micro and macro aggressions. I've been called the N-word, and I'm much older than Eric. So I went to UVA in the 1970s when we would get called the N-word occasionally. Group of us of African-American students were walking across the street, and some students in a car careened around the corner and tried to hit us while they called us those names, throwing water balloons at us. The litany went on and on and on. And then afterwards, throughout my life, I've had those particular occasions. And I think that there are two things that go on. I am African American, but I am also a lighter-skinned African American, and there are people who are threatened by that, both black and white. I find that too many whites seem to remind me from time to time that I'm African American, as if somehow I'm going to forget that, which is kind of comical to me. And so I have experienced a lot of things. One thing that I think hits the nail on the head of white people wanting to remind black people of their place in society. And this happens even with liberal-minded white people, because at some point, some, not all, some get threatened. And that is when I was doing a graduate course at Oxford in England, and our tutor was having a party for all the people in this group, and everyone was asking what they could bring to the party. and, most people were bringing food or drinks. And so when I asked him, he looked at me and he said, "You can sing Negro spirituals at the party." And I just looked at him. My mouth dropped open. I didn't know what to say. I was so shocked. And I didn't say anything to him, and I walked away. And I think the moment it came out of his mouth, I looked at his eyes, and he was horrified by what came out of his mouth. I could tell that. And every step that I took, walking away and walking back to my dorm, I got angrier and angrier. And I actually went to the president of Exeter College, which is where I was, and I fussed. And he said, "Really? He's the most liberal of us all." And I said, "Well, you all have some serious problems if he's the most liberal." But I did make an appointment. I went back and talked to him, and I said, "The moment you said that to me, prior to that moment, I felt as if I was a part of the class. But the moment you said that to me, you differentiated me from the class. You alienated me from the class and marginalized me, not just as a student, but as a human being." And I hope that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He apologized profusely, but it had such an impact on me. And so when I see young African Americans experiencing these types of micro and macroaggressions, people don't know the trauma that it imprints on the way that you think, the way that you react, and how you regard yourself. And if you don't really understand what this could potentially do to the way that you regard yourself, then you can go down a pathway that's not really positive. Yeah. But our society, in its historical silences about these issues, do not provide the support that African Americans need to maneuver through all of these aggressions that they encounter, if not on a daily basis, definitely on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're engaged in another View Race Let's Talk About It town hall conversation. Our topic, When Silence Speaks Volumes. My guests are historian Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, Dean of the School of Liberal Arts at Norfolk State University, Dr. Eric Claville, Director of the Center for African American Public Policy, also at NSU, and Veronica Gallardo, Casemate Museum Operations and Collections Manager with the Fort Monroe Authority. Veronica, microaggression or some racist action that has happened to you?
Yes, Barbara. This is a really good question. And when I think about it in both ways, the personal and then thinking about an entire group that goes through this. Mm-hmm. We've been seeing this lately a lot, this xenophobia coming straight from the White House. In regards to your culture, in regards to immigration, all my life, I have experienced, go back to your country. I was born here, mind you, or don't speak Spanish. Why are you speaking Spanish? This is an English country. And, those sorts of comments have personally have, your family, or you start thinking, and I know my father thought this, of a stimulation. What can I do to protect my children that they don't have to go through this? And this is one of the reasons why I don't go around saying my name is Veronica Gallardo. My name, I assimilated. My fathers made sure that I go around making, this code switching, right? Between one's culture. But I will say, all my life, my childhood, in regards to, my culture and speaking Spanish, and my parents decided that I'm no longer going to speak Spanish, that they need to speak English so I can, assimilate, that we can assimilate. I'm very lucky that we continued speaking Spanish because I'm fluent in that language. But what was interesting that occurred lately, was a comment about, it started with my hair, okay? That my hair is so wild. And I looked at this person and, was very, why are you commenting about my hair? And, he said, well, people like you, aren't you people like you thick-skinned? And I said, people like me, like New Yorkers? Because absolutely, right? And no. Like, people like you, Hispanics, Latinos, Hispanics. I said, excuse me? Like, oh, yeah, white people, you're tougher than white people.
Wow.
And my mouth just dropped. And I could not believe this was happening in a professional setting. And, it shocked me because, I probably had these sorts of conversations or comments as a teenager or maybe in college. And you think that, these are adolescents or youth. You don't know better. But to hear this in a professional setting was very shocking. And that those comments are the reason why I do what I do with, as a public historian, and to bring diversity and inclusivity into the museum field and how, the way that we tell story needs to be changed. The people that represent these organizations need to be changed, and to understand that people like this that have these thoughts, that they're making decisions, they're making organization decisions. And in order for us to really change, organizations need to take a more responsibility, HR, learn about biases and make these sorts of changes because it affects your workforce. And that's, again, it's a difference. And it's sad for me to say this, but there's a difference when someone makes these comments on the street and then at your workplace, right?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I went to piggyback on something that Cassandra said, and many things have happened to me also, but I think about my our little nephew who is 5 years old, and he came home from his school one day. He's in the minority at his school, and he said, "Today, Mommy, I am white." And she said, "No, you're a little brown boy. You're African American. Why do you say you're white?" And he said, "Because today the kids played with me, so it must mean I'm white." So when you want to think about what microaggressions do to the psyche of a child, of a person, as they deal with that on a daily basis, I just want you to keep that in mind. Our phone lines are lit up, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. George joins us from Chesapeake. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me, or actually answering my call and having this discussion. It's a very important discussion. Thank you. There was a question you had posed a few moments ago.
What does silence mean?
That's right. For a lot of people, I think, of course, it means complicit. But my thoughts went to, what do we want people to do once they've decided they no longer want to be silent? And personally, I don't want everybody to get up in arms and protest at every given opportunity. Not everybody can do that. But I would challenge people to ask themselves, what can they do? And I want them to have these conversations with their friends, their families, their colleagues, to challenge the discussion on racism, to speak up when they see it, to challenge those who, to just have people think differently for a moment, to say, I don't agree. Why do you agree?
So, in other words, get involved in the conversations. What else can people do? Panel, who wants to take that? Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, caller, for that question. We all can make an impact in our own communities and where we are. Protest is one way, but also, as you stated, if you're around a group of friends and your friends are making these comments and these divisive comments, these hate-filled comments, you can stop them right there and charge them or correct them, and you guys can have that discussion. If you're a decision maker in your office area, you also have the power to create these conversations and engage these individuals and bring people in that can actually teach the employees or or have these conversations with you to help facilitate, to bring understanding. The reason why we have this, and this going back to something Veronica had stated when people talked about her and made comments, it's based upon fear. And when the status quo and the ruling class in any society is fearful that their status is going to be overtaken, there's intimidation that they also have as well. These are the things that come out. This is why it's so terrible what the White House is doing and fueling these actions and giving a voice to these people that have this hate in their hearts, whether it be in Charlottesville, whether it be in Richmond, the different protests there, or whether they be in all these separate communities across the country and the world. We can make that impact on a micro scale with our family, with our friends, in our office, and also through policy for those individuals who you can contact your elected officials and make your voice heard.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Gary joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Gary. You're on the air.
Hey, Barbara. How you doing?
Okay.
My comment is, as you said, about silence. I'm going to use you as an example with me, so I don't know you that well, but you said something and I said you say something. If I don't have that on video or I don't have it, are you sure Barbara said that? Is that really what she's saying? With video, or even better, live streaming it, there is no question what you said. I now can speak up because I can literally go, this is exactly what you said. Good example, the woman in New York with the bird-watching guy, or Paul Riddick and the Chinese community comment. I'm Native American white. I'm perceived as white by most people, but I'm actually Native American. So when you tell me to go back to my country, just call me a boy named Sioux. I happen to be a Sioux Indian. This is my country. You all came here after the fact. And then it's go back to a reservation. Well, sorry, again, my country. So video, no matter who it is, like I said, Paul Riddick in the Chinese community, my spouse happens to be Chinese American. And you know what he said in his comments as a city councilman.
Yeah.
It's documented. You can't argue it. You can't go, oh, that's not what he said. He said something else. When it's live streamed, there's no edit. There's no, this is exactly what they said. So now you have the ability to speak up and say, this is not acceptable behavior, whether it's from a city councilman or a woman in a park or, you on air or any of your other guests on air. It's documented. There's no refuting it. So it does give people more advantage to speak up, because they no longer have to argue or prove what was really said.
What was said. I got you, Gary. Thanks so much for the call. But even, Eric, when people have videotape and they take it to the courts, there's still an argument over whether or not what is on the tape is actually on the tape.
Again, our country, we've seen it before. When the laws don't fit the status quo, they change it. When it's in your face, they'll lie to you, they'll deny it, and they'll move forward as if they don't see it. So the courtroom, that's a totally different animal. But the caller is right. When you see it, there's no denying it. But to change the hearts of the people, and that's the
hard part. Absolutely. Yeah. Veronica, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to take it to, this level of behaviors and within yourself. You can say something. Someone can speak to someone incorrectly. You're disrespectful. You can speak up, and you can go home, and it doesn't affect you. You feel good about yourself. Yes, I said something. Really reflect in your surrounding and how you behave in general. Like if you have kids, start teaching them early. Try to make friends with other people that don't look like you. I know that, certain areas that's a little difficult, but there's so many programs. We live in a world that people are playing games with other people in other countries, and there's ways that you can teach your children very early on differences. And that can help. So I just feel that we need to work more on the I in order for us to work on the we.
Cassandra, I want to ask you a question. This was one of our callers who had to hang up. He said he's confused about what to say and when. He's getting confused about when it is a racist comment and when it's not, to acknowledge a person's skin color. In other words, is it okay ever to acknowledge the person's skin color, or if you acknowledge it at any point, are you then being racist?
So I'm not really sure why you would acknowledge a person's skin color unless everyone is talking about their skin color.
Yeah.
I think that the over consciousness about people's skin color is actually part of the problem. People are always talking about what color you are. There is an overemphasis in Western society of getting a tan, but then don't have a permanent quote-unquote tan, because that's different from being able to get a tan.
Yes.
And so our society has been overly imbued with this concern over color, and a lot of that really comes from Western society. You see it in Western literature going back to the 14th century and even before, talking about that. I don't think that it is ever appropriate to touch a person's hair, to touch their body, unless you're invited to do so, and to then talk about a person's physical characteristics, unless you have certain questions, and you have to decide in the context of your discussion whether that question is appropriate or not. And a lot of times it really just is not appropriate. Because with that question, usually there's some other intent that's sort of overlaying that question. To give you a personal example, I was in junior high school when Norfolk initiated massive busing. And one of my classmates, who was white, was talking, and, he made a couple of stupid comments, but, one of them was, you're blushing, but I can't tell that you're blushing. And I jumped on him and I said, I'm a half a shade darker than you. What are you talking about? You are not making any sense. And then the other question he asked me was, are you mixed with something else? And I said, why you ask? He said, well, because of your color. And I said, no, I'm pure African. Why do you ask? And he didn't know what to say after that. And I said, that was a stupid question. Now, mind you, I'm 13 years old talking like this to him. And I just, I said, if your question is, what exactly, you recognize that I'm mixed with something. What do you think I'm mixed with? Why is that important to you? Why is it important for you to know that? Are you trying to understand African Americans a little bit more than you understand currently? Then ask those kinds of questions. Don't get at it through the back door, which actually insults me and makes me defend what your eyes see. And so I always say, really it's the context of it and whatever relationship you have. But in any situation, always be honest. Don't try to come at it through the back door.
Yeah. So whose responsibility is it to teach others about racism? I mean, in other words,
it's everybody's responsibility.
Okay.
I do not want for whites to think it's the responsibility of black people. And I don't think black people, I think it's the responsibility of white people or anybody, Asians, or anyone else. I think it is important that we all talk about it, because our culture and our global culture has enforced a racist system that has demonized people the darker they are. And I think it's everybody's responsibility to talk about it.
What do you think, Veronica? Same thing?
I agree. I also feel that these types of discussions need to happen early in our educational system. I just feel that it needs to happen in all directions. Our government as well needs to play a role in these, and I think that our past president was, and hopefully that can change again. So I do believe that everyone is able and can participate in a process where we can heal from all of the ugly.
Mm-hmm. Eric?
I'm a believer, well, first of all, we just have to tell the truth. And I'm a believer that the laws and public policies created this division and these lies. So the laws and public policy have to correct it. As a matter of fact, the governor created a commission to scrub the books and remove all discriminatory language. And Cassandra and I had a conversation with one of the chairs, and he said as he went through this, he found that these just weren't laws that were created haphazardly, but it was a complex, well thought out system of racism and discrimination in order to give white Americans an advantage over Black Americans and, in Virginia, Native Americans. So we have to just tell the truth. But the question becomes, Barbara and everyone else, is the ruling class, Europeans and white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, willing to relinquish the false status that they've created for themselves through European colonialism and the imprisonment, the enslavement, and the laws and public policies that keep their power in these countries? I think the answer is no.
Yeah. Let's go to John in Virginia Beach. Hi, John. You're on the air. We got about 5 minutes, and we need to be quick.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'm a 78-year-old white man, father's family from South Carolina, mother's family from New York. I was a student at San Jose State in the same dorm with Tommy Smith. Not friends, we just had a nodding acquaintance. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking, I want to make the case, since you're talking about the silence, the impact of silence, make the case for the passive support of whites. I see kind of a breakdown of 5 tiers of whites in their view of attitudes of blacks. Tier 5, whites who are actively despise blacks and would do them physical harm. Tier 4, whites who would not do physical harm but would tell disparaging jokes behind their back. Tier 3, whites who are neutral but actively choose to live separately or just have not had the opportunity to react and live comfortably with black people. Tier 2, what I constitute myself in this, those who realize the unfairness of racism but don't have the activist personality, don't have the confidence in their views to act, don't have the standing, or as Barbara alluded to, felt they would be at risk if they spoke, at risk in a job, at risk of losing friends and family, alienation. I know that's not the way Barbara meant it when she's talking about blacks' silence to stay alive. I understand that, but there is a corollary there. And then tier 1 would be the civil rights activists, people like John Lewis, who are extroverts, have the personality, have the power and credibility to act. My point in this analysis is that when a George Floyd moment occurs and institutional racism is exposed so plainly, tier 2 passive supporters can come out of the closet and, I hope, be a useful ally to the Black Lives Matter movement if we just know how.
Oh, that's thank you so much, John, for that call. Cassandra, you want to react? In the last 3 minutes we have.
I really thank the caller for actually putting it into those categories. That was beautifully done. I think that, at what point do you speak up and speak out? And that really is the measure of one's ethics and morals. But it also is a measure of how much fear. You can't have an oppressive society unless you create an environment of fear. And our society created that environment for whites to be just as oppressed in some ways as blacks. They could not love who they love. They could not speak out against oppression and violence. If they did, they would be imprisoned. They would be killed. They would be harmed in some way. Or for many, they would be segregated from their own society. And so at this stage in our nation's evolution, 400 years since the arrival of the first Africans, where are we going to go? And are we finally going to start embracing that history that we say we're so proud of, or I should say that aspirational history that we're so proud of, and that is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Okay, that's Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander. Cassandra, we know you have to run for your next meeting, so we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you tonight on on part 2 of our conversation. Okay, Eric, you got 30 seconds. Give me a final thought for our audience.
Again, I think this is our time as a country. This is our time as a human race. We see what the difference is in our leadership in the country from 8 years of Barack Obama to now of Donald Trump, and you see the actions of the people. Is this what we want our country to be? Do we want to lose our country because of the hatred that we saw during the Civil War and other times in our period, in our history? This is our time. This is our moment, and we have to grab it.
Okay, that's Dr. Eric Claville with Norfolk State University's Center for the Study for African American Public Policy. We'll see you tonight on part 2 of our call. Thanks, Eric, so much. I know you have to run also. Veronica, you get the last 30 seconds, actually 15 now. Give us a final thought.
My final thought is have the empowerment and be brave. Okay, this is a brave country. Be that person to make change. Don't stay silent.
All right.
Speak up.
That's Veronica Gallardo. Thank you so much, Veronica. We'll see you tonight also. And we hope that you will join us this evening at 6:30 as we continue this conversation on ways to speak up against racism and racist actions. Please visit whro.org/talkaboutrace to sign up and receive your Zoom link for the conversation. My sincere thanks to all of you who had the courage and the determination to participate in today's conversation, and I hope to see you this evening. Next week on Another View, Lisa Godley brings you an Another View special on redlining, how laws enacted to determine where African Americans could live continue to create disparity and segregation today. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Wash your hands, practice social distancing, wear a mask, and join us next Thursday at noon for Another View.